my name is Nate Joy. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer officially in April of 2023. I had been, having symptoms for a couple of months at that point, and so I knew something was wrong, and it was like basically started out here in the Wenatchee, in the Confluence system. Every time I went in, I was getting progressively worse news, essentially. And so, at first it was like, something's wrong. We don't know if it's cancer or not. Then eventually it's probably cancer. We don't know what kind. And then it's probably pancreatic cancer, which is, basically the worst kind of cancer as far as survival rates. And then ultimately, I ended up, kind of getting a second opinion out in Seattle at Fred Hutch. And it was, yes, it absolutely is pancreatic cancer, and we need to get you in and going on a treatment protocol as quickly as possible. I think the moments then within all of that were differing amounts of terrifying, but the one that was probably the worst was when we actually stepped into Fred Hutch for kind of the meeting where they were going to give me the program. And I'll never forget it. I walked in and I looked over at the computer screen was kind of turned towards me. And I saw something about, chemotherapy, training, treatment, something like that. And up to that point, nobody had indicated to me that there's going to be any chemotherapy, anything like that. And I wasn't supposed to see that. So I started getting scared about that, and they were handing me pamphlets about pancreatic cancer, and they hadn't told me about that this was exactly what was happening, so I was getting pretty nervous. And then I went into the room where the oncologist kind of met me, and of course, this was still coming off the COVID era, and people were wearing masks, which is a little bit impersonal. And I remember when she dropped the news that I have been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, my heart just like sank. And my wife was there next to me, and I remember she kind of like patted me on the back, and just I felt like her being there was very important at that moment. But it was devastating because all of the news shared that day was like, this is extremely serious. Like, we don't know if you're going to survive, and we're going to do everything we can, because one thing I learned in the hospital system is I'm young in the world of hospitals, at least, and especially with the disease like this, they wanted to throw everything they could at me to make sure that I had the best chance of getting through this. So that was kind of the main moment. And then from there, everything moved very, very fast, because I was pretty far along. Well, I did catch it early. There were some reasons to believe that it was maybe just in time. And so yeah, and they didn't tell me all of that at that time, but as I learned more and more, it was kind of like they were viewing me as a pretty high risk for metastasizing. Fortunately, at the time of diagnosis, there was no indication that it had spread. Wow. And so that is like, for this kind of cancer, once it spreads, it becomes much more about managing the rest of your life, and there's really no hope for any kind of cure. Before it spreads, there is a small hope for a cure, and so that's kind of where I was at that point.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And do you know how, like the time frame of when they caught it? Like how long had you had cancer by then?
It's difficult to know that. I've read actually that, the cancer like this can sort of grow within you for many years. I mean, 8 to 10 years even, before it gets to this kind of stage. And so, unfortunately, there aren't really any like obvious symptoms a lot of times for folks. And I was passing through blood tests and doing my annual physicals and all of these things, and there really wasn't any indication that anything was wrong, up until I did start to have some concerning symptoms in February of 2023, and I basically started to, I love food, I love eating. I started to only be able to eat like a third of what I would normally eat and feel like super full. And then first my wife and then my mother-in-law mentioned, that I was turning yellow. And so that is jaundice, which I did not know anything about at the time. And so the jaundice kind of progressed where it was just basically a full body internal kind of itching that could never be relieved. And so pretty quickly, within a week or two, I was like one big scab. I mean, it was incredibly painful. And so that is what prompted me to go into Confluence, into the ER. And pretty quickly things moved along and they were able to insert a stent. Once they discovered that there was a tumor, they were able to insert the stent and sort of bypass some of the situations that was causing the immediate discomfort. And so that at least got me to the point where I wasn't having jaundice at the time. And I was able to kind of continue on my program.
I see.
Yeah.
And so when you were diagnosed, how old were you at that time?
So I was diagnosed a few days before my 45th birthday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
near your birthday.
Yeah. Actually, I remember I went out with friends for my birthday after I was diagnosed, but 2 or 3 days before I started chemotherapy, actually.
Wow.
So it was crazy.
Yeah. So talk about your treatment and how you tackled that and where you got treatment and how much you said you had a lot of chemo or radiation from what I was reading in your...
Yeah. So basically it's every kind of journey is a little bit different for folks with pancreatic cancer, but the general concept is that you want to, there's going to be some chemotherapy, there's going to be a surgery called a Whipple surgery, and then sometimes there's going to be radiation. And so the way sometimes the surgery happens at the beginning, and then they do chemo. Sometimes it happens in the middle, and they do chemo on each side of it. In my case, I did 12 rounds of chemotherapy, and it's basically it's FOLFIRINOX. It's the hardest of the chemotherapy drugs they have, basically. And so it was I started on May 3rd, I think, and basically every 2 weeks I'd go in for 12 sessions total. Each of these sessions I would do infusion of 2 drugs in Fred Hutch, and then afterwards I would do a third drug, which was infused over 48 hours. And so I would go home with a kind of a bag attached to me, which was kind of interesting, kind of walking around Seattle with a bag attached to me. And then I would have basically a week off, and we'd come back to Leavenworth where we live, and actually had a pretty decent summer. The chemotherapy for me was not as bad as I thought it would be in terms of the effects. I did lose some hair, but not all of my hair. Obviously it grew back. The going through the actual infusions had its own, each kind of drug had its own weird side effects, I guess, during the infusion. But then basically in my off week, I'd start to feel a little bit better.
What were some of those feelings, though, those side effects that you felt?
Oh gosh, well, one of the drugs, one of the main side effects is that it can very quickly and easily produce neuropathy, which, in the hands and feet. And so I was working, funny enough, Fred Hutch was doing, I opted into this program where they were trying out acupuncture during the infusion. And so I had an acupuncturist come in while I was being infused with this drug and stick needles in me. And then also through kind of a naturopathic oncologist that I was also working with, there was a concept of basically staving off neuropathy by inducing cold on hands, feet, and mouth. And so if you can picture this, during this infusion, I have this drug infused into me. I'm getting acupuncture, and I'm also dipping my hands and feet in buckets of ice for over 2 hours.
Whoa.
And my sister or my wife, whoever was with me, was feeding me ice cubes this entire time. I was very cold.
Yeah.
But it worked. I didn't actually start to have some neuropathy effects until the very last session. And the good news about that is that they were able to actually continue do my entire program, basically, because a lot of times what happens is people have neuropathy so bad that they have to discontinue the drugs or they have to change up the drugs. But fortunately, they were able to continue the entire program. And so I was able to do all 12. And the cool thing is, each time they do your blood work, and there's a cancer marker for pancreatic cancer called CA19-9. Most people have values between 0 and 50 or so. Mine started over 7,000.
Wow.
And so later on, my surgeon told me they were very concerned about that. They didn't tell me initially, because that was even high for people in my situation, actually. And usually would indicate that it had metastasized. But every single time I went in, I got this marker checked, and it was cut by 50%, 30%, 50% every time it went down. And so by the 12th time, it was down to like 180, which is not that much higher than a normal value. And so that to me was very encouraging, because I never took a step back. Every time I went in, it was going down, it was going down. I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
There was a time in the middle of it, though, however, because they would be doing MRIs and CT scans and stuff, where they saw some lesions on my liver, and my oncologist prepared me for the worst and basically said it sort of looks like this is spread, this cancer spread.
Yeah.
It took several weeks to determine the answer to that, but it turned out that it hadn't, thank goodness. And so basically that was the 12 weeks there, and then at the end of that, they determined that I was still eligible for this Whipple surgery. And so that was always in question. And the reason that they waited for me to do the surgery until the end was because they were nervous of the possibility that the cancer would spread at any point. And so they determined that surgery is not worth doing if it does spread, because it is such a tremendously invasive and difficult surgery that if the cancer has spread, there's just no point, really.
Right.
And so fortunately, I was able to stay on the path, and at the end they said, okay, you're still eligible for the surgery. They set the date for November 18th, so I had about a month and a half to sort of recuperate from the chemotherapy.
So what does that surgery, you said it was invasive,
Yeah.
do they have to actually go in through the abdomen like a old school,
Yeah,
we're going to cut you open kind of a thing?
Yeah, so there's a couple of options, which I learned all these things that I never really wanted to know. But one of the things is that, my surgeon was Dr. Jim Park, and he's one of the premier surgeons, as far as I can tell, for pancreatic cancer in the country. He also pioneered this robotic approach, I think, to pancreatic cancer, to this Whipple surgery. And basically, he described to me as I was going in, he said, there's a chance, depending on how the tumor is situated relative to your arteries and veins, et cetera, that we may or may not be able to do this robotically. And that was important because basically, the idea is that they would be able to do it. That's the better way to do it, because the incisions are much less, and also it's just less can go wrong, essentially. And so fortunately, they got in there, and they were able to do it robotically. And so today you can't I can barely tell that I had this surgery. There are a lot of people who are basically cut open from the whole thing.
Wow.
I mean, it's a major issue for the rest of your life. And so fortunately, they were able to do the robotic surgery. I think it took about 10 hours. So because the robotic situation, they kind of go in from the bottom and come up, and it takes longer, I think, for the robot to do its thing. And so they were able to do that. I never forget. Like, there's some moments that I'll never forget in this whole scenario. One of the moments was after waking up from this intense 10-hour surgery. The surgeon standing above me, and keep in mind I've gone through like almost a year of like diagnosis, like chemotherapy, etc., all this stuff, and I've made it through this very narrow path to where I was at, even to have a successful surgery. And he told me, and by the way, he saved my life. So, but the news that he delivered that moment was, there's about an 80% chance that even if this was completely successful, that the cancer will come back. Yeah, and so you can imagine, I'm like, oh, like, you're delivering this news like now? On the other hand, it's like, when do you deliver that news, right? I mean, it's, and so I'm like, okay, well, this is good to know. And so basically, that was the news then. So of all of what I just described to you, from the moment that I had, jaundice, to the moment I went through chemotherapy, to the moment I had the surgery, the most intense part of this whole process was actually the recovery from the surgery. And so I had a lot of, they said there were about a 20% chance that I had these complications, which I did. I had kind of pockets of fluid form all over my body, which in places that there was no way for it to exit. And so they put in some different, basically things through my abdomen to kind of slowly just kind of suck out the fluid. And this was incredibly painful. And it lasted, this kind of like, it lasted for about 6 weeks, where I would, basically the hospital would be like, okay, you're doing okay. I'd go out into the world. I would have some kind of incident that showed that I wasn't. I would go back to the hospital. I'd spend another week there. And so I went back and forth to the hospital 3 times, spent about probably 3 total weeks in the hospital. But also we had to rent an Airbnb because we didn't expect to have to be in Seattle at that time for that period. And it was scary because we were doing kind of our home care. And so we had incidents at home where all of a sudden this bag would fill up with blood, and we didn't know what to do. Thankfully, the surgeon was on call for us, and he was incredible and kind of walking us through the situations. But it was, I couldn't sleep for those 6 weeks more than maybe an hour and a half a night. I was in so much pain, primarily because it was that everything was like draining kind of out through my abdominal wall, and this was just, I couldn't walk. I mean, it was just so painful. Yeah. So this was not ideal. But fortunately, a couple days before Christmas, they were like, okay, I think you're actually to the point where the intervention that we've done has worked. Now we can take this out, and you can go on with your life and your recovery and stuff like that. And so I was able to get home. Shortly thereafter, I met with my oncologist, and this is about New Year's of 24, so almost a year ago today. And she said, we've been able to read your blood work. We've been able to see your scans. It looks like the surgery was successful. You're doing well, given everything you've gone through, even though you had a terrible kind of post-surgery experience. And there's one more thing to do, which is, potentially some radiation therapy. And so the point of that, at that point, the cancer that they had identified was gone as far as they could tell. But they had done a lot of studies and different, had come across some knowledge basically that in the absence of this radiation protocol, a lot of times what would happen is like a couple of years later, that the cancer would grow back in the same spot. And so this is a different risk than the cancer growing back, kind of metastasizing in other spots.
Right.
And so this radiation, helps with that. And so I ended up actually getting the radiation piece locally here at Confluence, and the team did a great job. Kind of met with the radiologist, and it's 28 days straight, not the weekdays, but 28 weekdays. Sorry, not the weekends. 28 weekdays straight.
Yeah.
It's about 15 minutes a day, just going in there, and basically they make a mold of where they need to hit the radiation, and it just hits you at the same spot. It's very quick. I felt a little bit sick, but nothing like crazy. And so basically I just had to drive to Wenatchee every day and drive back, and it wasn't actually, that part wasn't a huge deal in comparison to like what happened before that.
Right. So what was this whole ordeal like on your wife and your sister and your family?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, it's hard to speak for every single person, but obviously as I was with my wife the most, and I think we've been married for 20 years. We actually just had our 20-year anniversary, and so we've grown up together since we were kids, basically, and she was remarkable in that, from the minute that this happened, she said to me that she felt like she just had this feeling of peace, like everything was going to be okay. And that kind of guided me through a lot of these times when it didn't feel like everything was going to be okay. For me personally, it was kind of like very, very scared that I was going to leave her alone. And I still to this day, I mean, I'm not like out of the woods, and so it's like it'd be a fear of mine, and I think certainly a fear of hers that she would be alone, we do everything together. We actually work together. We have our own business that we run together. We do coffee in the morning with our two little puppies. We spend all of our time together. I mean, it's our life is like completely together, and so. All the experiences we've had, everything, it's devastating to think about, and so I'm sure from her perspective, in the same sense, it's like our lives are so wrapped up with each other that the thought of not having, especially like when we think we should have, 30 years left together or however long, it's devastating,
Yeah.
And I think, you just saw. I think everybody really has their own way of grieving, I guess, because the news was not good, and so I mean I think everybody probably had to spend some time preparing themselves for like what would it mean for me not to be there, or like if I were to decline quickly, which happens pretty regularly with this kind of cancer. Fortunately, I think that we did have kind of between Leavenworth and Seattle, between friends and family and different things, we had definitely some good solid support. I can remember, I mentioned my wife came with me to a lot of my chemotherapy sessions. My sister came with me to the ones that my wife did not, and gave her a break, which was amazing. And she's so creative. She would always bring a YouTube playlist, and we would kind of like explore like comedy and songs and like all these things. And like we have this moment in our relationship that I treasure, and I just, as I was thinking through this yesterday with my sister, I just said, thank you I'm just so glad you were there, in the worst time of my life, sort of thing. And so, this was a very just emotional time. And I think as far as like some people that are in our lives that stepped up to the plate, some of them we knew for a long time, some of them we hadn't known very long, and we had people dig through our storage unit and drive to Seattle, local friends, and deliver our stuff because we were moving around and there was a lot of uncertainty. And we just it was just that a lot of amazing things. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, a bit of some silver linings in there. One of my biggest questions that I always ask other people who have had near-death experiences, because I've had one myself, is, what does staring down the barrel of the very real possibility of not being alive anymore, how does that change your perspective on life?
Yeah, it definitely, I guess it sort of simplifies what's important, for sure. So, thinking about, for example, I was going through some job turmoil as well during this time, but it's like, it didn't, whether I was, laid off or not, or had to it didn't like matter at that point. Like at that point, it's like all that matters is living, and giving my best to the people around me every single day, and to myself. And like, I think one thing that I did was kind of like a little bit of a journey of self-discovery. I just fortunately early on in the process, I was able to come across a book called Radical Remission, which was very just inspiring. And just kind of stories of folks who had put some things in place in their life and kind of achieved this radical remission, this like amazing remission in their cancer journey. And I think that anyways, that kind of helped inspire me towards this, not being defeatist, not thinking that this is over and done. Like I have a lot to give, I have a lot to live. And so I was able to dig really deep into who I was, and definitely through the help of kind of mental health counseling, I was able to get a counselor who was also a cancer survivor, who's still helping guide me through myself, really, like digging deeper into who I am and who I want to be, and just the gratitude of every day. I mentioned we had puppies at the time, just spending 5 minutes like on the floor with them, getting in their faces, like feeling the pure love of puppies. Maybe in the past I wouldn't have done that. It's like you have to get on with your day, but it's like those moments are worth it, and really just like also not being opposed to anything that could possibly help me, and so like I've explored some sound bath therapy and different things that I wouldn't have even like known about or thought about before.
Yeah, that was something that you put in your timeline, and that I thought was interesting, is this, kind of advice. You said advice that I would give to others is don't dismiss the mixing of maybe traditional and more non-traditional medicine. So can you talk about how that happened for you?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that I came to realize is that the folks, for example, at Fred Hutchinson, they're trained their entire life. They're the best at what they do, and that is to remove my cancer. One of the things I really try to say is the cancer, not my cancer. Yeah. So they've trained their whole lives to remove the cancer. They did an excellent job, and they absolutely saved my life. However, there is so much more support that one needs when they're going through something like this. There is so much more. I think that and the kind of more Western approach, alongside of maybe the naturopathic approach, they're typically not going to come together on their own. In other words, I described the acupuncture that I received earlier during my chemotherapy sessions. That's kind of an outlier. That doesn't normally happen, and that is maybe the beginning of two approaches kind of starting to come together, which is awesome. But as a patient, as a person, you have to understand what you're comfortable with and how you're going to grow and how you're going to best find that marriage of yes, removing the cancer, but also supporting your body, supporting your soul, like growing as a person, all of these things. And so I was, fortunately, early in the process, able to come across this amazing naturopathic oncologist, which there's a couple of really great places in Seattle that exist for this, for folks that are going through this. And so the nice thing is, the oncologist at Fred Hutch, would deliver me the news, and I would be, kind of in their world. But I would also be working with the naturopath who's like talking about how do we support X, Y, and Z going on in your system, and so that was, and even to this day, again, I view the naturopath a little bit more as like taking care of me day to day, week to week, month to month, whereas now I'm checking in with the folks at Fred Hutch to make sure that the cancer is not coming back, et cetera. In addition to that, I've gotten a lot of great ideas to do vitamin C infusions, which actually I can get through a business in Leavenworth called Inner Waters. I've also done sound baths over at East Wenatchee with a business called Screaming Octopus. I've gotten mental health counseling, like I said, actually through somebody in Seattle, but obviously there's a lot of great folks here in Wenatchee as well. So the cool thing is, if you're in Central Washington, if you're in North Central Washington, there's some incredible folks out here that are providing some amazing services that you would expect in Seattle, but exist here. And so that is a really cool thing. You don't have to live your life in the big city, if a lot of us have moved out here to not do that, and yet still experience the joy, the mountains, and everything we love about living out here.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that I thought was interesting too, is that you said don't let this stop you from living.
Yeah.
So can you kind of go into that a little bit, and how you were still pretty active and as much as you could be, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I every day I was in Seattle, I would go on basically a pretty long, like hour-long walk with my dogs, and so that was important. But we also, like I mentioned, we had kind of an off week of chemotherapy, and we would come out here to our Leavenworth place, and we were stand-up paddleboarding in Lake Wenatchee. We were hiking, in the mountains. We were doing all these things, and I wasn't letting chemotherapy stop me. And I think it also just like brought those moments into just sharper relief as far as like the joy of what we get to do out here. Like just enjoying nature. It was just like so. It was just a balm for the soul, really, just to be able to be out here. And so I believe that my body responded well because I took that approach. I didn't let it stop me. And I will say that, I was fortunate in that the chemotherapy didn't like sideline me as much as many people. Many people are very ill from these drugs. Fortunately, I wasn't. And so I was able to do that. So I would just say, like, if you have this cancer diagnosis, don't necessarily think that it's going to stop you. Do as much as you possibly can to get out there in the world is what I would recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good advice. Is there anything else that you think that we should talk about that I didn't ask about? That's usually like my last question is.
Oh yeah. I think we've covered. We've covered a lot of it. I do think that there were some scary moments that are kind of unfortunate and adjacent to this experience, which is I was laid off kind of in a couple of different experiences during this process. I was a consultant working at a larger company, and my project was stopped kind of at the end of my chemotherapy, which I actually worked all the way through chemotherapy full time. And it was a difficult, it's a difficult experience to feel as though you have to keep going, you have to keep working. Life doesn't stop, and I think that it's really important for folks as they're thinking about the medical structure, like the community, insurance, all of this, to understand that if you're in this situation, you know, you're still expected to bring value to the table as an employee, oftentimes, which is just very unfortunate. It's very difficult. And so I was lucky. I was able to kind of opt into paid medical family leave through the state. And then ultimately my company, prior to being laid off, my company did have a long-term leave policy, which I utilized as well. And so I was able to take some time off during the surgery and the recovery and the radiation. And so I count myself as fortunate. A lot of people are not. And so these are just things to think about, I think, as we all are experiencing healthcare, you know, in our country. My current situation now, just so you know, is basically like the pancreatic cancer usually comes back, as I mentioned, 80% of the time, even after a successful surgery. The good news, the silver lining, is that it usually comes back within 2 years. And I'm already over a year without any evidence of disease. And they're so frightened by actually this disease, they don't even say you're in remission.
Really?
Like they just say you don't have evidence of disease.
Wow.
And so I'm over halfway to that point at which my percentage chances of survival have already increased dramatically,
Really?
just in a year. And so I'm very I'm like believing again that I have a future, like truly believing. Yeah, and so if I can continue, my chances increase, and the times that they see me at Fred Hutch decrease until after 5 years, they say you're cured. So that's the gold standard for people who have this disease, is like if we can make it to 5 years, then the chances of it coming back are actually very, very low. And I think that differs from some other cancers. I'm not a cancer expert, but I believe like breast cancer, for example, et cetera, can come back 15 years later, like, you know, not it's a significant amount of time. For pancreatic cancer, it's usually like it comes back pretty quickly, or it doesn't come back at all. My life is like impacted in the sense that this surgery, they actually took out a lot of the digestive system and kind of refastened it back together. And so, you know, that impacts, like, I think twice before I go to have a greasy meal. Yeah. It really does impact that kind of stuff. But other than that, I have a pretty normal life. And so, like, if I can, you know, continue, and I believe I will continue on this path, I can live a normal life. I can have a full life. Like, there's no reason that I can't. And I'm just so grateful for that second chance at life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good for you.
Yeah.
It's not often you talk to a survivor of pancreatic cancer. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully, this gives people hope, and I think that you've got, you know, a lot of good advice here to give, and it's fascinating listening to your story. So thank you for sitting down with me today.
For sure.
Yeah, and sharing this story.
Yeah.
And all the best to your wife and your family.